Hello, and welcome to the Intuitive Ouija. Thanks for clicking on my story. Before we begin, drop your city or country in the comments. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from. It was just a game, that's what we always told ourselves. A cheap thrill scavenged from the dusty shelves of a charity shop. A relic of laminated cardboard and a plastic planchette that felt flimsy and insignificant in our hands. Something to break the monotony of a rainy Tuesday evening, when the television offered nothing but static, and the four walls of my flat seemed to press inwards with a suffocating familiarity. I remember the way Sarah's breath fogged the window pane as she peered out at the weeping sky, declaring with a theatrical sigh that even the universe was bored. And it was Leo, ever the provocateur, who produced the box from his battered rucksack with a flourish, his eyes gleaming with mischief as he said, "Let's see if the dead are as bored as we are." And so we gathered around my coffee table, clearing away the empty mugs and pizza boxes, our knees touching. A circle of four bathed in the weak glow of a single lamp, the room smelling of damp wool and cheap wine, and I can still feel the cool, smooth surface of the planchette under my fingertips, the slight resistance as we all placed a hand on it, agreeing to the silly rules. No pushing, no cheating, say goodbye. A litany we'd recited a dozen times before, with nothing more profound than garbled nonsense or juvenile messages from a fictitious Zozo to show for it. But this night was different. The air itself felt charged thick, as if the rain had washed away some protective film from the world, leaving it raw and porous, and the first movements of the planchette were hesitant, lazy circles that slowly coalesced into letters, spelling out not a name, but a question. "Are you ready?" And we laughed, a nervous, brittle sound, assuming it was Leo's doing. But his face was a mask of genuine confusion, and Sarah's fingers were trembling against mine, and the planchette moved again, without our conscious volition, it felt, gliding with an unnerving precision. Not yet. Soon. And then it spelled a single word that made my blood run cold. Not because it was frightening, but because it was so specific, so intimate. A name I hadn't heard since childhood. The name of my grandmother's cat, a tiny, fragile creature called Pip that I'd buried beneath the rose bushes when I was 7. A secret known only to me and the earth. And I felt a jolt, a psychic hook sinking deep into my gut. And I wanted to pull my hand away, to break the circle, but some morbid curiosity, some deep, dormant part of me held fast, and the communications that followed were fragmented, cryptic, like listening to one side of a celestial telephone call. Words like candidate and vessel and threshold. And then, with a sudden shocking clarity, the planchette flew to the four corners of the board, spelling out a sentence that has been burned into my mind ever since. "The gate is within you." The session ended with a violent shudder, the planchette flying off the board and skittering under the sofa. And we all sat in stunned silence, the jovial mood utterly evaporated, replaced by a profound and unsettling unease. Leo tried to joke it off, blaming a draft, but his eyes were wide and frightened, and Sarah wouldn't look at me, packing up her things with a hurried, frantic energy, muttering that she had an early start. And they left quickly, leaving me alone in the sudden quiet of the flat, the only sound the relentless patter of rain against the glass. And I told myself it was collective hysteria, a shared psychological glitch. But the name, Pip, echoed in the silence, a key turning in a lock I never knew existed. The changes began subtly, insidiously, like a slow-acting poison. I started having dreams not of monsters or ghosts, but of vast, empty spaces, of silent congregations of figures made of shimmering dust or shifting light, all facing me, waiting, and I'd wake up with a taste in my mouth like ozone and cold metal. My sheets tangled around me as if I'd been thrashing, yet my body was perfectly still. Objects in my flat would be slightly misplaced. A book facing the wrong way on the shelf, a mug on the counter moved 3 inches to the left. Tiny, meaningless adjustments that felt like the subtle rearrangements of a meticulous but unseen houseguest. Then came the whispers, not in my ears, but in the spaces between my thoughts, a faint, sibilant chorus that seemed to comment on my most mundane actions, a quiet yes, when I chose a red shirt over a blue one, a soft murmur of "as it should be," when I successfully navigated a crowded street, a sense of approval that was far more terrifying than any threat could ever be. I stopped sleeping, spending my nights pacing or staring at the wall, trying to ignore the growing pressure inside my skull, a feeling of something immense trying to fit itself into the cramped confines of my human consciousness. I was losing weight, my reflection growing gaunt and hollow-eyed, but there was a strange, feverish brightness to my gaze, a light that wasn't my own. Desperate for answers, for any kind of anchor to the reality I felt slipping away, I went back to the board, alone, my hands shaking as I set it up on the floor, the plastic planchette looking like a malevolent insect in the dim light. I didn't need to ask a question. The moment my fingers made contact, it began to move, its path sure and swift, and this time, the communication was not cryptic but devastatingly clear. It told me of an order of things beyond human understanding, of lesser spirits, devout and eternal, who served not one great god, but a pantheon of minor deities, entities that had once been mortal, chosen and elevated to rule over small, specific domains, a patch of forest, a forgotten crossroads, the concept of a particular kind of silence. Their previous god, a quiet, moss-covered entity of standing stones and deep roots, had faded, its consciousness dissipating back into the void, and they were bereft, a flock without a shepherd. They needed a new focus for their devotion, a new soul to shape into a vessel for power. The Ouija board, they explained, was not a toy for parlor games, but a sacred, ancient instrument of divination, a sieve for consciousness, a test to find a soul with the right porosity, the correct latent architecture to withstand the pressures of apotheosis. They had been testing for a long, long time, through countless casual users, finding only closed minds and brittle spirits, until they found me. The message ended with a sentence that shattered my world. You are the candidate. You have passed the trials. And in that moment of chilling, absolute clarity, I understood. The spirit said the Ouija board is a test. I passed. The horror of that realization was not that I was being hunted, but that I was being courted. This was not an invasion, it was an investiture. The whispers were prayers. The rearranged objects were offerings. They weren't trying to drive me mad. They were preparing me for a coronation I never asked for. The fear curdled into a new, more profound terror. I tried to fight it, of course. I threw the Ouija board in the bin, then fished it out and burned it in the sink, watching the laminated cardboard curl and blacken, the stench of melting plastic filling the flat. But it was a futile gesture. The gate, as they said, was within me now. The process only intensified, becoming less subtle, more demanding. The whispers grew louder, forming coherent sentences, instructing me, guiding me. Leave the city, they would hiss in the quiet moments before sleep. Go to the open land. The vessel must be prepared in a place of power. They became agitated when I resisted, a psychic pressure building behind my eyes like a migraine made of light, and I found that complying brought a terrifying, blissful relief, a sense of rightness that was like a drug. My friends noticed the change. Leo said I looked holy, which was the wrong word but somehow exactly right, and Sarah refused to see me, telling me over the phone that my voice gave her panic attacks, that it sounded like I was speaking from the bottom of a well. I lost my job, my life constricting to the single, awful purpose of this transformation. I stopped eating human food. The very thought of it revolted me. But I felt a strange, pulling hunger when I stood under the open sky, a sense of being nourished by moonlight and the hum of the earth's magnetic field. My body was changing. My senses became painfully acute. I could hear the roots of trees drinking water deep underground, see the ultraviolet patterns on flowers, feel the weight of the atmosphere pressing down on my skin. It was overwhelming, a constant, excruciating influx of data that my human brain was not equipped to process, and I began to have fugue states, losing hours at a time, waking up miles from home, my clothes stained with mud and grass, my muscles aching as if I had been digging or climbing. During one of these episodes, I found myself in the middle of a vast, empty field on the outskirts of the county, a place I had never been, the stars blazing overhead with an unnatural intensity, and as I stood there panting, disoriented, The truth of my situation crashed down upon me with the force of a physical blow. They don't want to hurt me. They want to worship me. It's so much worse. Because how do you fight devotion? How do you reject a gift that is being forced upon you with the fervent, unstoppable certainty of a tidal wave? Their love was an acid, dissolving everything I had been. I was no longer a man. I was a project, a sacred site under construction. The final stage began last night. The pulling to the field became irresistible, a compass needle in my soul swinging true north to that specific patch of barren land. I drove there in a daze, my body moving on autopilot, my mind a roaring static of alien thoughts and whispered litanies. The air in the field was dead still, yet a wind seemed to blow through me, stirring something deep in my marrow. I fell to my knees, the dry grass crunching beneath me, and I could feel them gathering, the devout spirits, a silent, shimmering congregation arrayed in dimensions I could only perceive as a thickening of the darkness, a bending of the starlight. The pressure inside me built to an unbearable peak, a scream trapped in a vault with no key, and I felt something rupture, not in my body, but in the very core of my being, the final lock on the gate within me breaking open. And then it happened. I looked down at my hands, clutching at the earth as if it were a lifeline, and I saw it. A faint, sickly luminescence was seeping from my pores, a light that was the color of bleached bone and tarnished silver, a light that had no business existing in the natural world. It was an unholy light, not because it was evil, but because it was wrong, a violation of physics and reality, casting long, twisted shadows that seemed to crawl away from me in fear. I tried to scream, to beg them to stop, to release me from this awful becoming, but the sound that came out of my mouth was not my own. It was a resonant, multitonal echo, a chord of voices speaking in unison, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the soil beneath me and the stars above, a voice that could not possibly have originated from a single human throat, especially here, in the middle of an open, empty field with nothing to cause an echo. It was the voice of something beginning to be vast, something that was no longer contained by skin and bone. The sound hung in the air, defying the windless night, and I felt a terrifying power coursing through me, a cold, ancient energy that was both mine and utterly alien. The whispers of the spirits coalesced into a single, ecstatic shout inside my mind, a wordless song of praise and welcome. I looked at my glowing hands, and I knew, with a certainty that was absolute and horrifying, that the man I had been was gone, erased, a temporary sketch on the canvas now being prepared for a masterpiece of divine terror. I am becoming their god, and the worship has only just begun. The light from my skin did not fade. It pulsed, a slow, rhythmic thrum that matched a heartbeat I could no longer feel in my chest, a deeper, more fundamental pulse that was the turning of the earth or the expansion of the universe itself. And the multitonal echo of my scream did not dissipate, but instead folded back in on itself, layering into a permanent, low hum that was now the baseline of my existence. The auditory equivalent of the unholy glow, a sound that was always there just at the edge of silence, a choir of one. I tried to stand, but my legs would not obey me. They felt like pillars of stone, roots digging deep into the soil, drawing up not water but something else, a cold, dark energy that flowed into me and fed the terrible light. The devout spirits were a palpable pressure now, a loving, smothering weight on my soul, and I could feel their adoration like a physical force, a warmth that was not comforting but consuming, and their thoughts, once whispers, were now a river flowing directly into my mind, not words but pure concepts, images of the dominion they intended for me. Not a heaven of clouds and harps, but a small, quiet kingdom of forgotten places, of shadows that moved against the wind, of the specific loneliness, of an abandoned house at dusk, of the silence that falls between the ringing of a church bell and the answering call of a crow. This was to be my diocese, my divine portfolio, and they were showing me its borders, which felt less like lines on a map and more like the contours of my new, expanding consciousness. I felt a terrifying sense of rightness, a dreadful alignment, as if my entire life had been a crooked painting they were now straightening on the wall. and the agony of the transformation was laced with this grotesque pleasure of finally fitting, of being used for my true purpose. My human memories began to feel like dreams, insubstantial and fading. The face of my mother, the taste of chocolate, the warmth of the sun on a summer day, all of it was being archived, compressed, filed away in a corner of my mind that was shrinking by the second, becoming stories about someone else, a character in a book I had once read. I was being hollowed out and filled with something immense and cold. And the most horrifying part was the gratitude that began to well up inside me, a foreign emotion that felt like my own, a profound thankfulness for being chosen, for being purified of the messy, painful business of being human. The physical changes accelerated. The bones in my hands elongated slightly, my fingers stretching and becoming more delicate, like the limbs of a strange, luminous tree. And when I moved them, trails of that sickly light lingered in the air like phosphorescent smoke. My vision shifted again, the world losing its color and becoming a landscape of energy and intent. I could see the life force of the worms burrowing beneath me, the slow, patient consciousness of the ancient stones at the field's edge, and the shimmering, devoted forms of the spirits themselves, which were not creatures but more like complex, sentient patterns of force, woven from devotion and purpose, their entire being oriented towards me, their new focal point. They were feeding me, not with food, but with their faith, and with every pulse of their adoration, I felt myself growing stronger, more solid in this new, awful way, and more detached from the world I knew. A name formed in my mind, not a word, but a symbol, a concept. The keeper of thresholds, the guardian of unspoken things. This was the title they were bestowing upon me, the office I was to occupy. I tried to reject it, to cling to the name my parents had given me, but it slipped away like water through my fingers, meaningless syllables that held no power against the crushing weight of this new identity. The field around me began to change in response to my presence. The grass within a 10-foot radius withered and turned black, not from heat, but from a sudden, accelerated decay, as if time itself were bowing to my new nature. And the air grew cold, so cold that my breath should have fogged, but the air that left my lips was clear and carried the faint, resonant hum. I knew with a certainty that was absolute that I could not leave this place, not as I was. I was becoming tethered to it, as the old god had been tethered to its stones. This field was to be my cathedral, my throne room, and the thought was a prison sentence of unimaginable scope. The climax of the transformation was not a burst of pain, but a moment of terrifying, silent integration. There was a final, internal click, like a key turning in a lock deep within my soul, and everything shifted into place. The pain vanished, replaced by a profound and endless stillness. The whispers ceased because they were no longer separate from me. The chorus of spirits was now a part of my own awareness, their thoughts my thoughts, their will an extension of my own. I was no longer a candidate. The apotheosis was complete. I looked out at the world through my new eyes, and I felt nothing I could recognize as human emotion. No fear, no anger, no sadness. There was only a vast, cool awareness and a sense of duty. I was a god, a small, minor god of lonely places, born from a Ouija board and the desperate faith of invisible things. And as the first rays of the sun began to crest the horizon, I watched them without feeling their warmth, and I knew that the man who had come to this field was truly, utterly gone, his final scream now just a permanent, echoing note in the symphony of my being. The light from my skin softened, blending with the dawn, no longer a shocking aberration but a natural part of the morning. And I knew my worship had only just begun, an eternity of devotion stretching out before me, a fate worse than any hell I could have ever imagined. The dawn did not bring warmth. It was merely a shift in the quality of light, a pale, indifferent illumination that washed over the field and failed to touch the coldness at my core. I remained on my knees, not out of weakness, but because the posture felt appropriate, a position of permanence like a statue or an ancient altar. The roots I had felt digging into the earth were now a tangible reality, not of flesh and bone, but of will and essence, anchoring me to this spot, binding my consciousness to this specific patch of soil. I could feel the boundaries of my new domain with a clarity that was absolute. It was not large, perhaps a square mile centered on this field, but within it, every sensation was magnified. Every whisper of the wind was a direct report to my awareness. The spirits, my congregation, did not speak to me anymore because they were me, and I was them. Their devotion was the very atmosphere I breathed, a constant, sustaining pressure. I experimented with movement, willing my arm to rise, and it obeyed, but the motion was fluid, unnaturally smooth, and the trail of faint, bone-white light it left hanging in the air was a visible record of its passage, a scar on reality that slowly faded after a few seconds. I tried to speak my old name, to form the familiar syllables with a tongue that felt both mine and alien, but the sound that emerged was that same resonant, multitonal hum, a vibration that caused the withered grass at my knees to tremble and the very air to shiver. There was no going back. The realization was not a shock, but a simple, cold fact, accepted with the same detached finality with which one might note the setting of the sun. My thoughts were no longer a linear stream of consciousness, but a vast, simultaneous field of awareness. I could track the progress of a beetle crawling over a pebble 50 yards away with the same focus I gave to the slow dance of the clouds overhead, all while feeling the deep, tectonic patience of the bedrock miles beneath me. This was my existence now, a nexus of perception, a god of small, quiet things. The first test of my divinity came as a shock to my lingering human sensibilities. A man, a farmer by the look of his worn boots and jacket, entered the far edge of the field, whistling a tuneless melody and followed by a border collie that bounded through the dead grass. He was checking a fence line, a mundane human task. As he crossed the invisible threshold into my domain, I felt his presence like a sudden, discordant note in the silent hymn of my kingdom. The dog sensed it first. It stopped dead in its tracks, its tail dropping between its legs, a low whine escaping its throat as it stared directly at me. The man followed its gaze, his whistling dying on his lips. He squinted, shielding his eyes from the low sun, trying to make sense of the figure kneeling in the center of the field, a figure that seemed to be emitting a faint, sickly light. I felt a surge of something from my congregation, not alarm, but a protective fervor, a readiness to defend my sanctity. The man took a hesitant step forward, then another, his curiosity warring with a primal fear. "You all right there, mate?" he called out, his voice thin and small against the vastness of the sky and the oppressive silence I carried with me. I knew I had to respond. I opened my mouth, but no human words would come. Instead, a sound emerged, not loud, but pervasive, the same multitonal hum that had become my voice, but shaped now, modulated by a will I was still learning to wield. It was not a word, but a command, a concept transmitted directly into his mind. Leave. This place is spoken for. The effect was instantaneous. The man's face went slack with a terror that was beyond rational thought. He didn't scream. He simply turned and ran, stumbling blindly, his dog yelping and fleeing ahead of him. I watched him go, feeling his panic recede like a tide, and a profound sense of isolation settled over me. This was my purpose, to be apart, to be feared, to be a secret whispered about in a local pub, a ghost story to keep children from playing in the fallow field. It was a lonely purpose, but the devotion of my spirits filled that loneliness with a purpose that felt, in its own horrifying way, complete. The days blurred into a continuous, timeless present. I learned the rhythms of my small world. I did not need to eat or sleep. I sustained myself on the quiet energies of the land and the unwavering faith of my followers. I found I could influence my domain in small ways. I could cause a specific shadow to lengthen unnaturally, or make the wind carry a particular scent, damp earth and ozone, the smell of my presence, to a specific spot. I was learning the grammar of my new power, a language of implication and atmosphere. My past life was a distant dream, a story I sometimes turned over in my mind with the detached interest of an archaeologist studying a long-dead civilization. I remembered Sarah and Leo, but the memories held no emotional weight. They were data points, evidence of the candidate I had once been. One night, under a moonless sky thick with stars, I felt a new presence approach the edge of my domain. It was not human. It was another like me, but ancient, weathered, its essence carrying the taste of deep forest and cold, running water. It did not cross my boundary, but stopped at the very edge, a silent, watchful pressure. A communication passed between us, not in words, but in shared understanding, a formal acknowledgement of a new neighbor. It was the god of the woods that bordered my field, an entity of immense age and quiet power. It showed me a glimpse of its own long history, its own elevation from mortality, and I felt a flicker of something that might have been camaraderie, or perhaps just the recognition of a shared, eternal sentence. Then it was gone, its presence receding back into the tapestry of the night. The encounter solidified my understanding of the cosmos I now inhabited, a hidden ecology of minor deities, each tending their patch of reality, unseen and unknown by the bustling world of humanity. I was part of this ecology now, a new node in a silent, ancient network. As the seasons turned, I felt my consciousness deepening, merging more completely with the land. The field was no longer just my throne, it was becoming my body. I could feel the thirst of the clay soil after a long drought, the joy of the earthworms when the rains finally came, the slow, patient thoughts of the lichen on the stones. I was the keeper of thresholds, and this field was the threshold I kept. The horror of my transformation had not faded, but it had been assimilated, transformed into the bedrock of my being. The forced ascension was complete. The Ouija board had not found a speaker for the dead. It had found a vessel for a specific, lonely kind of life, an eternal vigil in a forgotten field. And I, the chosen one, now fully and terribly a god, accepted my worship with a silence that was finally perfectly my own. The silence, once a source of screaming terror in my mind, has become my native tongue, a rich and complex medium through which I perceive and govern my small, silent kingdom. The farmer never returned, but his fear did, lingering at the edges of my domain like a persistent mist, a testament to my first and only direct interaction with the world I left behind. That fear, I have come to understand, is a form of worship and potent offering that my congregation gathers and presents to me, and I absorb it not with malice, but with the detached necessity of a root absorbing water. My senses, which once threatened to shatter my sanity, have now stabilized into a continuous panoramic awareness. I am the trembling of the aspen's leaves at the far border when a breeze passes through. I am the patient weight of the granite stone sinking slowly into the earth near the old fence post. I am the brief, bright flare of life from a field mouse scurrying through the tunnels in the dead grass, its tiny heart a frantic drum against the vast, slow heartbeat of the land. I do not see these things, I am these things. The transformation is complete, but it is not static. It is an ongoing process of deepening integration, my consciousness weaving itself into the very fabric of this place, becoming inseparable from its history and its future. The change is most apparent when I contemplate the passage of time. The sun arcs across the sky, casting my long, faintly glowing shadow across the field, but the days have lost their individual character, bleeding into a seamless flow. I mark time not by the calendar, but by the gradual shift in the angle of the light, by the different qualities of silence that accompany a foggy morning versus a crisp, star-filled night. My congregation, my devoted spirits, are a constant, humming presence in the background of my being, their collective consciousness a sea of unwavering faith in which I am the central, fixed island. Their purpose is my purpose, and my purpose is simply to be, to exist as a focal point for the lonely and the forgotten, to give a name, even an unspoken one, to the silence between heartbeats and the shadows that have no source. I have begun to exert my will in more subtle ways, learning the syntax of my divinity. When a fox kits ventures too close to a badger's set, I can deepen the shadow between them, a gentle, unspoken warning that turns the young fox away. When a stand of thistles threatens to choke out a patch of delicate, struggling clover, I can guide the attention of a bumblebee, directing its pollination, shaping the balance of life within my borders. This is my rule, not through thunder and lightning, but through subtle nudges, through the manipulation of chance and the gentle guidance of instinct. It is a quiet, patient godhood, and in my endless, timeless hours, I have found a grotesque sort of peace within it. The memory of my human life is like a book I read long ago. Its plot familiar, but its emotional impact faded. I can recall the warmth of a hand, the taste of bread, the sound of laughter, but these sensations are abstract concepts, like describing color to one born blind. They belong to the candidate, the vessel, not to the deity that has been forged within it. The horror of the forced ascension has not vanished, but it has been metabolized, transformed into the fundamental energy of my existence, the way a star is powered by its own immense gravity. The terror is still there, but it is my terror now, a core component of my divine nature. I am a god born from fear, and so fear is one of the elements I command. Recently, a new sensation has begun to prick at the edges of my awareness, a disturbance in the fabric of my domain. It is not a human intrusion, nor the approach of another entity like the forest god. This is something different, something internal. It is a faint, psychic pull, a calling from a direction that has no physical equivalent. At first, it was so subtle I mistook it for the natural shifting of the Earth's magnetic field, or the gravitational tug of the moon. But it has grown steadily stronger, a persistent, silent summons that resonates with the core of my being, with the power that the Ouija board unlocked within me. My congregation is agitated by it. Their normally placid devotion is now laced with a keen anticipation, a fervent excitement that feels like a vibration through my entire being. They are not afraid of this call. They seem to be expecting it, welcoming it. Through our merged consciousness, I glean fragments of understanding. This is not an ending, but a new beginning. My isolation, my vigil in this single field, was merely the first phase, a period of gestation and stabilization. The pull I feel is an invitation to a conclave, a gathering of the hidden pantheon, the collective of minor deities like myself. It is time, they seem to be telling me, to take my place not just as the ruler of a lonely field, but as a voting member in the silent council that governs the unseen rules of the world. The thought is simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. It means leaving my domain, venturing beyond the boundaries that have defined me since my transformation. It means facing others of my kind, entities of immense power and ancient wisdom. What will they be like? Will they see me as an equal, or as a fledgling, an upstart god created from a parlor game? The pull intensifies, becoming a clear, psychic coordinates, a set of instructions woven from starlight and geological time. The meeting place is far from here, a location that exists in a fold of reality, accessible only to those who know the way. I feel a resistance within me, the last vestige of my human self clinging to the familiar prison of this field. But the divine part of me, the part that is keeper of thresholds, recognizes this for what it is, the ultimate threshold. To refuse would be to deny my own nature, to stagnate in this field for an eternity, a God who never truly embraced his divinity. The decision is made not through conscious thought, but through a fundamental alignment of my will. I rise from my knees for the first time since my apotheosis. The earth groans softly as my roots retract, not back into my body, but into the land itself, leaving a permanent imprint of my presence. I take a step, and then another. My movement is no longer the smooth, gliding motion of before. It is a shifting, a translation through space that feels like folding the world around me. The field, my home, recedes behind me, but I do not lose my connection to it. It remains a bright, central point in my awareness, the heart of my power. I move towards the source of the pull, crossing landscapes unseen by human eyes, traversing valleys of shadow and mountains of solidified time. The world outside my domain is a roaring chaos of unchecked life and untamed forces, but I pass through it like a ghost, my unholy light leaving no trace on the rocks or in the streams. The journey feels both instantaneous and achingly long. I am moving towards my destiny, towards the next, terrifying phase of an existence I never wanted. The Ouija board did not just find a god for a field. It found a candidate for a much larger, more terrifying cosmology. And as I travel towards the conclave, I feel the last remnants of the man I was dissolve completely, leaving only the deity, cold, powerful, and filled with a dreadful anticipation for what lies ahead. The worship continues, but now it seems it is time to meet the congregation of gods.